happens a lot is we want something in our life, or we see pictures of other people in the Bible, or we see a miracle or an incredible thing come through it. But the problem is 90% of life is not the miracle. It's the in-between season, isn't it? You don't have to be alive long to realize that life has hard situations. And if we just try to go from miracle to miracle and skip the in-between seasons, it's not going to work. Or what happens sometimes, and why we wanted to do this message series, was because we did a big series on revival. And it was exciting. But what can happen is if you get all excited and God's doing all this stuff, and then you go into a valley, you go into an in-between season, you can get taken out because you're like, where's God? I don't know what's going on. I just thought everything was going to be great, and I felt God, and I don't feel God, and it's going well, and now it's not going well, and you start to judge your life based on that instead of, and what can happen is you follow God on the high points. You follow God when it feels good. You follow God when it's all going your way. But then when you get into the valley and hard times come, you start to push away from God. And we've been showing you through David and through Moses and through the Israelites, and Grant was tearing it up preaching the past few weeks. We've been showing how everybody in the Bible, all the things, there's miracles, but they all go through in-between seasons. And today I want to talk to you about more of that. But I want to push it another step farther, because I think sometimes we think, yeah, I'm going to get my miracle. I'm going to get my blessing. I know God has a dream for my life, and I know I'm going to get there. I trust God to get there, and I'm going to get there in spite of the in-between season, right? You think, okay, I want this to happen. I want, the finances to come in, or I want a healing for my body. I have a dream or a vision for my life. I want whatever your vision or miracle is, the revival or whatever. And we think, I'm going to get there in spite of the challenge. That the challenge is just a hindrance that I have to get over to get there, right? It's a hurdle that I have to cross to get there. But I want to argue with you today that it's not actually a hurdle to get you there. It's the only way you'll get there. That in fact, if you don't go through the in-between season, you actually won't be ready for the promise. So it's not that you'll get to your miracle in spite of your in-between, but it's actually you'll only get to your miracle because of your in-between. Is anybody with me today? Now, I need you guys to be talking to me, because otherwise I feel like you're sleeping and thinking about something else. So are you with me today? Amen. Let's go to Mark 5, 21 through 34. I don't know, my stomach's growling. I'm getting hungry. I have to get some donuts after this. Some Subway. Mark 5, 21 through 34. Are we ready? This one should be on the screen. I didn't do many things, but I did this one. All right, it's a little bit of a long passage, so stick with me, all right? I know we like things short, but this one's going to be not too long, but a little bit, so stick with me here. Mark 5:21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live. And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and was thronged about him. Someone say thronged. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and spent all she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, If I even touch his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, Who touched my garments? And the disciples said to him, You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, Who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Now, I want to go into the woman with the issue of blood here. But before I do, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Go a few verses, go a few things farther here in the slides. I want us to look at Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, or the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. Okay, in my Bible it says faith is the substance of things hoped for. What is hope? Hope is the miracle, isn't it? Hope is the expectation for what's about to come. Hope is, I have this expectation. I hope this is going to happen. But faith is the substance of things hoped for. So I want to show you through this story that if you can have a hope, but if your faith doesn't have the substance, you're never going to get the hope. You can have a miracle in your heart, but if your faith doesn't have the substance, if your faith isn't strong enough, then you will never reach your miracle. And many, many, many Christians go through their life, and they want something. They have a dream in their heart. They have a vision from God. They have a marriage they want to see restored. They have a healing they want, whatever it is. Maybe it's a family member who you want to come to Christ. You have a hope. But your faith never gets the substance it needs to make the hope a reality. Does that make sense? So how does that happen? How do we get our faith to the point where it has enough substance or assurance? Our faith is robust enough to receive the hope that we have in our heart. Are you tracking with me? Okay, so let's look at the woman. So what happens to this woman? For 12 years, she has had a discharge of blood. That means she just keeps bleeding. And she's considered in her culture unclean. And in that day, when you were considered unclean, that was a big problem. That means you were ostracized from society. That means if you had a husband, you left him because anybody you touched, if you were unclean, they became ceremonial unclean as well. So you could have had a family, and I don't know, it doesn't say, but say she had a husband and kids, I don't know, but she would have had to leave them or make them unclean and be ostracized as well. So her whole world is turned upside down. And for 12 years, this woman is catapulted into a horrific in-between season. This means you don't go out in public because if you touch anyone else, they become unclean. You can't even beg up close because you'll make them unclean. You are considered unclean. Get out. Get out of society. Go to the fringes. Could you imagine that? You're going along fine and you're fine, but then all of a sudden you have this sickness or this disease and you are cast out from society. You are glared at. You are stared at. You are ridiculed. Nobody wants you to come close to them because then you'll make them unclean and then they'll have to go out. That's a horrific in-between season. And not only that, but then she goes and she tries, like every one of us would do, she goes and she tries to spend all of her money, all of her time, trying to find the right doctors, the right remedies, the right herbs, or whatever she can find to make herself better. And by 12 years on, nothing has worked. No doctor has had a cure. No herb has worked. No medicine has worked. No new technology innovation has worked. Nothing has worked. And what's worse, she has blown any money she possibly could have had. She is haggard. She is poor. She is starving. And she is still sick. But then she hears about a man who does miracles. And she decides, this is my chance. And so she goes into a throng of people. Now, I don't know if you've been to a throng of people, but my wife and I have lived in London and we live near New York, and we've been to a throng. We've been to a place where there's so many people, it's hard to even walk. One time, my wife's sister, when we were living out there, she came to visit us. And so we spent the day going to all the cool sites, the St. Paul's Cathedral, and going all around London with her. And we went to go home, and we went to a train station on Oxford Street, which, if you know anything about London, it's like the busiest street. And what we didn't realize, we just got lost in the day. We hit Oxford Street to go to the train, the underground subway, they call it the Tube, right at rush hour on like a Friday. I think it was Friday. It's like the worst place you can possibly be on rush hour on Friday. And we had Tyron at the time. He was with us. And us two, Tyron was about 4. We had some bags for the day and things. So we're going, we get down there. And even to get into the train, you go way down under into the subway. And we get down there, and it's just lined with people waiting for the train. And so you're like this, and the doors, you finally get to the thing. The train comes, the doors open, you kind of like go in. And everybody crowds around us. There was so many people. Poor Tyron's like 4. He's down like crouching we're all like this. I'm holding bags above my head. And we're holding, and then when it was our stop, it was kind of like, fall out. It was a throng of people. Someone say throng. Now, I don't know if it was that packed, but it was packed. These people were surrounding Jesus. He was doing miracles, and he was going to go heal this girl, and there was just a throng. There was a massive amount of people. Now, wait a minute. This woman, ostracized from society, probably never dared venture into public for fear of touching someone or being ridiculed or being harassed. You wouldn't want that. After 12 years of being ridiculed, 12 years of being mocked, 12 years of not being able to touch anybody, what possessed her? To go into the throng of people and touch a ton of people and drag through this incredible amount of people, not caring who looked at her, not caring who she touched, to get to her miracle. I want to tell you, she was only ready for that because of her in-between season. If it would have happened, if she would have only been sick a year, she wouldn't have done it. If she had only been sick 2 years, she wouldn't have done it. Why? Because something happened in the in-between season of her life. Something happened in that horrific downtime, that horrific wilderness, that valley she went through, that she never would have been prepared to do what she did to receive the miracle if she hadn't gone through what she went through. Let me explain more. In the 1930s, when World War, I think it was 2, World War I or 2, German and England, 2? World War, one of them. World War both. In World War both, when they were getting ready, well, the London, they were terrified because Germany was talking about coming and bombing. In London, Winston Churchill and all the government, they were terrified because London was an incredibly, my wife's saying 2. World War II, can we get a census World War II? You guys are smarter than me. Well done. Well done. That's my in-between, all right? I got to deal with that. So, World War II, apparently, we don't know for sure, but we think that's probably it. So in World War II, they're talking about Germany's talking about coming and bombing, and this is one of the most packed cities, one of the most thriving cities of the world, London. And so the government was terrified that when the bombing started, it was just going to be mass chaos. We're talking, they thought the bombings were going to come. They literally thought 3 to 4 million people were going to flee out to the cities. They thought the economy was going to come to a halt. They thought that it was just going to be, that production would stop, stores would stop, 3 to 4 million people flee. They actually set up psychiatric wards all around the outskirts of the city, thinking that when the bombing started, that it was just going to be flooded with people having to go to the psychiatric wards. So in 1940, what they feared actually started, and Germany began the Blitz on London. They began coming and bombing. I think it was an enormous amount, like 57 days straight or something, of just straight bombs. They did it for like 8 months, that they were just bombing London. And all of that happened like they thought, but one thing: the way the Londoners reacted. It was strange because 3 to 4 million people didn't flee. Some people did, and some of the children and the wives and the mothers before the Blitz came, they did flee. But something weird, nobody fled. They just kept going on with life. And actually, I've seen pictures of it where there's literally sandbags stacked around stores, and people are just going in and out of stores, going on with life, bombings going on. The psychiatric wards that they thought were going to be filled, none of them were filled. the people didn't react how they thought. Well, why? Well, I read some reports on this, and one thing they said, well, there was 3 categories of people when they got bombed. There was one, the people who got hit. They were died. They dead. They dead. Everybody say they dead. It's good. I'm teaching you guys way more than you'll ever learn in college right now, by the way. They dead. Them boys were dead. And anyway, it's a good time to take a drink after that. Look at someone and say, he needs to take a pause. My son said that too emphatically. So the first group, they did. They did. The second group, they were traumatized. They traumatized. First group, they did. Second group, they traumatized. They were the ones who, like, they got hit or they got injured, and they were pretty traumatized. But then there was a third huge group of people where they called remote misses. What is that? That means they heard the sirens. They felt the shakes. They went to their bomb shelters, and their area was bombed, but they survived. And there was a unique thing that happened, and there's actually quotes from people saying about how it was almost exhilarating. They went to their bomb shelter, and bombs are flying all around them, and they were terrified, but they survived. And it actually didn't make them more fearful, because when you almost died and you almost ended up in the they dead category, you actually get encouraged and you get brave because you almost died, but you didn't. And it doesn't make you more afraid. It actually made them more courageous and more bold than they'd ever been before. Then you have another 2 or 3 misses, and you're like, man, I'm invincible, and it gives you more courage. See, that's kind of what happens. This woman had 12 years of near misses. She had 12 years of remote misses. She had 12 years of this sickness almost taking her out, but it didn't. 12 years of doctors that caused her pain, but it didn't kill her. 12 years of dragging through the mud, but it didn't stop her. She didn't end up more fearful. It's fearful. Afraid and fearful. Terrible. She didn't end up more afraid. She ended up more courageous. She didn't end up more terrified. She ended up more bold. It didn't tear down faith. Well, let me put it this way. It didn't tear down faith in the wrong thing. It started to build up faith in the right thing. And there's another quote I have on the screen, and I love this one. See if we can pull it up here. Yeah, right here. Courage is not something that you already have that makes you brave when the tough times start. Courage is what you earn when you've been through the tough times and you discover they aren't so tough after all. So I want to tell you, each one of us are going through something in our lives. And you can either have a breakdown or you can have a breakthrough. You can either have a breakdown or you can either have a breakthrough. You can either be in the one category who the bombs did affect. You had the one that you're being traumatized by your situation. Or you can be in the third category of remote misses where you said, man, it tried to kill me, but it just made me stronger. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger, right? That's what I'm talking about. Stand a little taller. You know what I'm saying? This is getting wild up here this morning. That's what you guys were thinking, admit it. That's right. You were thinking it. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Stand a little taller. I done lost it. They did. Anyways. So we all have a choice. We are going through a valley. We're going through an in-between, and I want to tell you, 90% of your life will probably be an in-between season. Don't get surprised when a hard time comes. This world is fallen. You're going to struggle with temptation. Financial trouble is going to come. How do you build faith? You go through those tough times. But as you have near misses, it gives you more faith. People tell me sometimes we have stepped out on a whim many times, and we should have been in major financial disaster. We have been on the brink of financial disaster more times than I can count. When I was 21 years old, I got into real estate investing, and I was like, I want to buy a house and do real estate investing. And so we went out, and we found this old, decrepit house. No, I kind of did that. It was my first... Oh, it's getting really hot in here. What doesn't kill me makes me strong. All right, let me reiterate. It was our first year of marriage. Probably not the best thing to do in your first year of marriage, to put that much stress on your marriage. But I went out, and I'm like just a go-getter. I'm like one of those ready, shoot, aim kind of guys, right? Some of you like aim and shoot, not me. I just go for it. My motto is go big or go home, all right? So anyways, I find this house in this up-and-coming area of Denver. And it was awesome. By awesome, I mean it was trashed. There was a lot of ways I could improve it. Because the thing was we're going to go in, we're going to renovate it, and we're going to sell it. Well, we end up buying it, and there's like hundreds of pigeons infested in the attic. Like hundreds. The whole thing needed gutted. There's mouse poo everywhere. It's just a disaster. There's literally vines growing across the windows. My wife's dad always says every idea becomes hard work at some point. So what I thought was going to take me about 4 or 5 months to fix up and X amount of dollars ended up taking like way more money, ended up like 8 months of renovating. It was just a disaster. In our first year of marriage, I mean, we ended up having to move in there, and we almost had 2 payments, a house payment to do that. It was just terrible. But we had to move in. We ended up getting somewhere to live. And somebody came and moved in there, lived in there for a year, and bought it, and we made money. But we almost literally this close to financial disaster. We've been like moving to London, and we were in a point where Alea wasn't getting a job, and it was like our money we had saved was running out, and we're like, we have to have money. We have to eat. That's unless I'm going to start selling dirt. I don't know what we're going to do here. But so we start praying, and we're like, all right, if by next Sunday we don't have a job offer or something, we have to move home. Ends up that Wednesday, Alea gets a call. She'd been looking for, 8 months? 8 months for a job. Finally, that Wednesday, she gets a call. So the process goes on. She ends up getting the job. The very week that we ran out of money was the very week we got our first paycheck. Okay, so when you have near misses like that financially, and we've had more than that, I could go on all day. And maybe some call it stupid, I call it faith, all right? So we're stepping out in faith. We've been on the brink of absolute financial disaster so many times, but God came through. It doesn't make me back down. What does that do? I had a near miss. It didn't make me more fearful. It made me realize, holy cow, we stepped out in faith to do something great, and on the very last moment, God came through to provide for us. So now I have more faith in God is my provider that gives me more courage to step out next time. Okay, so you can either have a breakdown or you can have a breakthrough. There's also studies done. People started studying entrepreneurs and business people, and they started seeing this weird trend that like a ridiculously large amount of them had a parent deceased when they were little. And there's been huge studies on that now where they didn't get it because like a third of successful people like majorly like changed the world, successful people had a parent die when they were young. But yet 2/3 of the prison population, they estimate, had a parent die when they were young. So you have 2 major categories of people that had a breakdown because of their trauma. They had a breakdown because of their hardship. They had a breakdown because of what they went through. But then you have this huge group of successful business people and entrepreneurs and innovators who had the same experience, but instead of having it have a breakdown, it caused them to have a breakthrough. And if you read, they say the only reason that they are where they are is because of what they went through and who it made them. Okay? So let's look back at the woman. She spent 12 years being ridiculed. She spent 12 years being ostracized. She spent 12 years dragging on her knees begging. 12 years not being able to go into public. Now, what could make a woman ostracized from society go into a group of people that everybody she touched made them unclean? I want to tell you, it was the in-between. It was the trial. It was the struggle that gave her what she needed to do that. She spent 12 years of getting numb to what other people thought. She spent 12 years of being ridiculed to the point where she didn't care anymore what people thought about her. She spent 12 years being stared at to the point that it didn't affect her anymore. The trial built up something in her life that made her capable of going through that crowd of people that she never would have had before if she didn't go through what she went through. She would not have done it at 1 year or 2 years or 3 years because the looks of the people would have still penetrated her heart and made her back down. She would have had other options. She hadn't tried all the doctors yet. At 5 years, she still hadn't tried that remedy. At 6 years, she still hadn't paid that guy to try that technique. See, because when you go into a trial, the other thing, it has to shape your faith. Well, how does it do that? It starts to push because you think you have faith in God, but a trial will show you what your faith is really in. Your trial will show you what your faith is really in. Because her faith, it says, was in doctors. She spent all of her money going to every doctor she could imagine, and things weren't getting better, they were getting worse. And some of you are in that place today. You think your faith's really in Christ, but your trial is showing you it's not. And you're going to this thing, and you're going to that, and you're trying this guy, and you're trying that girl to make you feel loved. And it's not working because your faith isn't in Christ's love, your faith's in that boy. Your faith's in that girl. Some of you, your trial is showing you that your faith is not in God as the provider, but your faith is in your employer as your provider. And then when you get laid off, your life is shattered because your faith was in the job, not in Christ. See, because in a trial, God will start to press you and shake you until you realize that you have nothing but Christ to rely on. Let's look at James 1 a minute, and it's on the screen. James 1. James says this, count it all joy. Someone say joy. When you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Doesn't that seem like an oxymoron? Count it joy, brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. How could he say that? Would we dare to say to that woman with the blood hemorrhage, hey, honey, count it joy? It's an oxymoron because we don't like it. But if you look at it from the point of the only way she received the miracle was going through what she went through, then maybe you'd have the audacity to stand before her and go, wow, I count it joy. Because if you didn't go through it, what you went through, you wouldn't have gotten the miracle that you got. If my wife and I haven't gone through the financial situation we have, we wouldn't have the faith in God for the finances. And let me tell you, when you're on the brink of financial disaster, it tests your marriage too. We've had some doozies. We've had some knockdown, drag-out fights. But I want to tell you, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, amen? That's what I'm talking about. Amen? Count it joy, brothers. Jesus said he's counting it joy to go to the cross. Because when we say count it joy, we think, but I don't like the trial. And God's saying, I'm not talking about joy, enjoying the trial. Don't have to be fake and like on Facebook, like, yay, I'm so excited, and pretend that everything's okay. You can go through the trial, but you need to realize from a higher perspective, thank God for this trial because it's preparing me for something. Don't shortcut the process. Don't try to get out of it. Don't try to find your way to somewhere else because it's feeling better at the time. The only way to receive the hope is to have substance of faith, and the substance of faith only comes through trials. Because it's like the ship that is going, and your ship is going, and you're on a sea, and you feel safe and comfort in your boat. Someone say, I like my boat. And you feel safe, and you feel comfortable, but then the winds and the waves start coming, and they start pressing against it, and the boat starts creaking, and you're fearful, and you're afraid, and it keeps coming, and before you know it, this boat that you think is your security, this boat that you think is your salvation, this boat that you think is the answer, the waves come and the pressure comes and it crushes it. And before you know it, you're standing on the water realizing that it was never the boat that was holding you. It was Christ holding you. That's what happens. Because this woman searched everywhere. She tried everything. But as she went through the trial, it was pointed out in her life that nothing would work but Christ. Nothing would work. No doctor, no remedy, no herb, no other god that people prayed to. I don't know, maybe she went and tried other gods. That's what they used to do in that day. She tried everything, and it was only getting worse until she was at the point where everything she had tried had failed, and the only thing she had left to rely on was Christ. And I want to tell you, when all you have left to rely on is Christ, and you finally realize that he's everything you need. He's everything you need. And I love this quote. I don't have it up there. It's actually by Muhammad Ali. Everybody know Muhammad Ali? If you don't, he's a boxer. He's like one of the world's greatest boxers. He says, I hated every minute of training. But I said, don't quit. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. Count it joy, brothers. Why? Did he enjoy the trial? No. But he counted it joy because if you endure it now, you can live the rest of your life as a champion. To the woman with the issue of blood, we can say, count it joy, girl. Count it joy, sister. Because what you're going through now will get you written in the Bible to receive an incredible miracle. Count it joy because what's going on in your life isn't a hindrance to your miracle. It's actually going to catapult you into the miracle, that if you never went through that, you never would have gotten there. That if you didn't go through it, you wouldn't have been calloused enough to what other people thought to push through the crowds. If your knees weren't bent up enough, if your knees weren't calloused enough, you wouldn't have been able to crawl through the dirt. If you didn't try everything, you wouldn't have realized to push through the crowd that you didn't care who you touched. You didn't care who you made unclean because you knew that nothing else had worked. And this trial had prepared you to realize that Jesus was the answer the entire time. And I think some of you are in that place. You are in a valley. And this is a critical moment in your life where you can either have a breakdown and say, yeah, I tried that God thing. Or you can go, you know what? I don't care what happened to me. I might have had a bad past. I might have had things that I didn't want to happen. Maybe my childhood was bad. Maybe my finances are a mess. Maybe my marriage is in trouble. Maybe it's not going how I want, but I'm going to count it joy because I realize that what I'm going through is preparing me for what God has for me, and if I don't go through it, I won't receive the miracle at the end. God is preparing you. God is preparing you. God is preparing you. There's another study on dyslexics. They realized that a bunch of Richard Branson and all these successful people were dyslexic. And they say it's only because of me being dyslexic, because of where I am, because I had to deal with failure. When I was dyslexic, I had to deal with failure so many times in school, way more than other people, that I just got impervious to failing. It didn't matter to me anymore, so then I would step out to do bigger things because I didn't really care if I failed because I was used to it. See, because their very trial of what people thought was going to take them out actually developed in them something that they could do what nobody else could do. And I want to tell you, God says he has a great work for every one of your lives. God tells you he has something powerful for each one of your lives. But I want to tell you, the greater the destiny on your life, the greater the trials that are going to be in your life. Because the greater the hope, the more substance your faith has to have. And your faith cannot have substance without the trial. Your faith cannot have the substance without the trial. So church, I want to implore you, I want to beg you to realize that in this valley, when it's hard, God is preparing me for something. and I will not back down. I will not be like those in the bombings who get traumatized by what's going on, but instead I will be like the remote misses that, yeah, that happened to me. Devil, you can come get me, but I'm not going down. I might have fallen down, but I'm not staying down. You tried to kill me, but you failed. You tried to send me in financial ruin, but God came through. I know my relationship was on the brink of disaster, but God resurrected it, because every time you have a near miss, when you almost fall, and if you don't turn away and you keep following God, he will bring the answer. He becomes the salvation. But you have to keep pressing forward in faith that God is going to do it. You cannot have a breakdown in the valley. So stand to your feet. Worship team, come up. Stand to your feet. I want you to take this moment to really worship, to really get your life right. Don't let this moment pass you by. Because some of you are in the valley and you are debating whether you are going to have a breakdown and turn away from God, or you're going to press harder into God than you've ever pressed. That you're going to abandon the faith, you're going to abandon your dream, you're going to abandon the desire because it's hard. Or are you going to say, God, thank you for this trial?
We hope you enjoyed this message from Risen Life. To find more, go to risenlife.net.